A single packet of Kool-Aid required 2 full cups of white sugar. The dye in it would be banned 2 years later, and nobody questioned a thing. Here are 30 pantry items from the 1970s you bought if you were poor. Kool-Aid was the drink of every budget household in America, and the math behind it was horrifying. A 5-cent packet of unsweetened powder required 2 full cups of granulated sugar to make a single pitcher. Every glass a child poured contained roughly 5 teaspoons of pure sucrose, plus a cocktail of synthetic dyes, including red 40, yellow 5, and blue 1, all petroleum-derived compounds linked to hyperactivity in kids. Edwin Perkins invented the powder in 1927 in Hastings, Nebraska, originally calling it Fruit Smack. By the 70s, it was the cheapest beverage in the country, and mothers stirred it up by the gallon because real juice cost 4 times as much. A child drinking 3 glasses a day consumed more added sugar in Kool-Aid alone than the American Heart Association now recommends for an entire week. There was nothing in it. No vitamins, no minerals, just dyed sugar water marketed with a cartoon picture crashing through walls. Potted meat came in a flat tin that cost less than a quarter, and for households stretching every dollar, it was lunch. Spread on saltine crackers, it required no cooking and no refrigeration. Hormel's version contained beef tripe, mechanically separated chicken, beef hearts, and something the label called partially defatted cooked pork fatty tissue. Sodium nitrite held it together and kept it shelf-stable for years. That preservative, when exposed to stomach acid, could form nitrosamines, compounds the World Health Organization later classified as a Group 1 carcinogen alongside processed meats. The texture was a thick, salty paste the color of wet sand. Kids ate it because it was there. Parents bought it because a can provided protein for pennies. Stick margarine sat in every poor family's refrigerator, sold as the modern, heart-healthy replacement for butter. The manufacturing process, called partial hydrogenation, pumped hydrogen gas through cheap vegetable oil until it solidified into a yellow block. That created trans fatty acids, and by 1976, Americans consumed nearly 12 pounds of margarine per person per year. Researchers later estimated that artificial trans fats caused up to 250,000 heart attacks and 50,000 deaths annually in the United States. The FDA did not ban partially hydrogenated oils until 2018. Brands like Parquet and Blue Bonnet ran cheerful television ads promising the taste of butter without the guilt. The guilt should have been aimed at the margarine. Every slice of toast, every batch of cookies, every pan of cornbread made with that yellow stick was loaded with a fat the human body could not properly process. If you grew up poor in the late 1970s, you knew government cheese by the weight of it. A 5-pound block of processed American cheese arrived in a plain cardboard box stamped with USDA markings, dense and bright orange. The government had created it by accident. In 1977, the Carter administration poured $2 billion in dairy subsidies, and farmers produced more milk than anyone could drink. The surplus was converted into cheese, butter, and powdered milk, then stored in over 150 warehouses across 35 states. By 1981, the stockpile exceeded 500 million pounds. Reagan, under pressure for cutting food stamps while warehouses overflowed, released 30 million pounds through the Temporary Emergency Food Assistance Program. People lined up at churches and community centers. The cheese melted beautifully and made excellent grilled sandwiches. For millions of homes, it was the only cheese anyone would see all month. The cheese came with a companion that nobody loved. Powdered milk arrived in the same surplus shipments, packed in large paper bags, and the taste was something no child forgot. Dry skim milk powder had been a military ration during World War II, and when the war ended, the government had mountains left over. By the 70s, it was a fixture in low-income kitchens. Mothers mixed it with tap water the night before so it could chill and mask the flat, chalky flavor. Some blended half real milk with half reconstituted powder to stretch the budget further. The kids always knew. The powder had been stripped of fat-soluble vitamins A and D during processing, and without fortification, kids drinking only reconstituted milk missed nutrients critical for bone growth and immune function. It was cheap, It was available, and it kept families from going without. Vienna sausages came 7 to a can, sitting in a pale broth that smelled faintly metallic. At under 50 cents, they were one of the cheapest protein sources on the shelf. The sausages were made from mechanically separated chicken, a paste created by forcing poultry carcasses, bones and all, through a high-pressure sieve. The USDA had already deemed mechanically separated beef unsafe for consumption, but the chicken version remained legal. Each small can delivered nearly 30% of the daily cholesterol and more than a third of the recommended sodium. Sodium nitrite was listed as a preservative. Kids ate them cold, straight from the pull-tab can, sometimes with crackers on the side. For homes with no time to cook and no budget for fresh meat, the little sausages were a solution that nobody questioned and nobody particularly enjoyed. Wonderbread promised it could build strong bodies 12 ways, and that slogan ran on every cartoon commercial block through the 1970s. The Federal Trade Commission challenged the claim as misleading, but by then the bread was already the default loaf in budget kitchens across the country. It was made from bleached white flour stripped of bran, germ, and nearly all natural fiber during milling. To compensate, manufacturers sprayed synthetic vitamins back on and called it enriched. Each 2-slice serving contained 5 grams of added sugar. Chemical dough conditioners gave it a shelf life real bread could never match. Counterculture critics called it plastic bread because you could compress it into a dense ball and it would barely decompose. 5 loaves cost $1 at most stores. In bulk, it became the foundation of every meal, from toast to Bologna sandwiches to bread soaked in milk when nothing else was left. Hamburger Helper appeared on shelves in 1971, and within a year, 1 out of every 4 American households was serving it regularly. General Mills designed it for parents who could not afford enough meat to feed everyone. 1 pound of the cheapest ground beef, mixed with dried pasta and a seasoning packet heavy with monosodium glutamate and sodium, stretched $1 into dinner for 5. The original lineup had 5 flavors, including beef noodle, potato stroganoff, and chili tomato. By 1977, sales dipped enough for General Mills to introduce Lefty, a white glove mascot with a clown nose and 3 fingers. Poor families bought it because the math worked. A box cost under $1, and the sodium-heavy powder disguised the taste of 70-30 ground beef, the fattiest ratio on the shelf. Spam had been feeding the American military since 1937, and by the 70s, it had migrated into the pantries of homes where fresh pork was out of reach. Hormel packed 6 ingredients into each can: pork with ham, salt, water, potato starch, sugar, and sodium nitrite. 1 serving delivered a third of the daily sodium and nearly a quarter of the saturated fat. Mothers sliced it thick, fried it in its own rendered grease, and served it alongside eggs or between slices of white bread. In the late 70s, the USDA tried to restrict sodium nitrite after research linked it to carcinogenic nitrosamines, but the meat industry fought the effort and won. The preservative stayed. A can cost around $1 and required no refrigeration until opened, perfect for households where the power sometimes got shut off. It was salty, it was filling, and the can was always sitting in the pantry. Before store brands existed, there were the generics. Around 1977, grocery stores began dedicating entire aisles to products in stark white packaging with plain black lettering. No logos, no photographs, no slogans. Just the word beans or corn or beer in block letters. They cost 30 to 40% less than name brands, and for families crushed by the decade's inflation and gas shortages, that aisle was survival. The food inside was often made on the same production lines as branded versions, but nobody knew that at the time. What everyone knew was that buying from the generic aisle meant you were poor, and every person in the checkout line could see it. There was no hiding those plain white cans. By the late 80s, name brands fought back with coupons, and the generic aisle vanished. Today's store brands carry better packaging and less stigma, but anyone who remembers those black and white labels remembers exactly what they signaled. Those generic labels never listed trans fat content, because in the 70s, nobody had to, and no product in the American pantry contained more of it than Crisco. Procter & Gamble introduced the all-vegetable shortening in 1911, and by the 70s it sat in nearly every low-income kitchen. Mothers used it for biscuits, pie crusts, fried chicken, and cornbread. A standard batch of partially hydrogenated Crisco contained roughly 40% trans fatty acids by weight. Every biscuit and every piece of fried okra delivered a fat that raised bad cholesterol and lowered good cholesterol at the same time. The FDA would not require trans fat labeling until 2006 and would not ban partially hydrogenated oils until 2018. For close to a century, Crisco sat on the counter in its blue and white can, trusted by everyone who used it. In 1976, the FDA pulled red dye number 2 from the food supply after Soviet scientists at the Moscow Institute of Nutrition found it caused tumors in rats. The petroleum-derived coloring had been the most common food dye in America, turning up in soda, ice cream, candy, and the cheapest snacks on the shelf. Low-income families were disproportionately exposed because budget foods relied most heavily on artificial color to look appealing. Mars yanked red M&Ms from production entirely, even though they contained a different dye, because consumers could not tell them apart and the panic was already spreading. The ban pushed a growing distrust of chemical additives, but the replacement was no better. Red 40, another synthetic petroleum dye, took over and stayed in Kool-Aid, cereal, and candy for decades. The FDA did not begin encouraging its removal until 2025. Canned corned beef hash was Saturday morning breakfast in half the poor households in America, and it came out of the can looking like something no one wanted to describe. Armour and Libby's were the dominant brands, and a single serving of Armour's contained 65% of the daily recommended saturated fat, plus a full gram of trans fat and 41% of the day's sodium. The ingredient list included sodium nitrite, the same preservative linked to nitrosamine formation in the stomach. Mothers scooped it into a cast iron skillet and fried it until the edges turned crispy, because the only way to eat it was to not think about the texture before it hit the pan. It was cheap, it was dense with calories, and it required nothing more than a can opener and a stove. Reddit users years later would compare its appearance to dog food, but in the 1970s, nobody cared what it looked like. It filled stomachs. Campbell's condensed soup was the backbone of budget cooking, and a can of cream of mushroom showed up in casseroles, pot pies, and anything that needed a sauce no one had time to make from scratch. A single serving packed up to 890 milligrams of sodium, nearly 40% of the daily limit, and most people used the whole can in one meal. But the sodium was not the only problem hiding inside. Until 1991, American food cans were sealed with lead solder along the side seams. The lead leached directly into the food, especially acidic products like tomato soup, and accumulated in the bones and blood of anyone who ate from those cans regularly. The FDA did not ban lead solder in food cans until 1995. On top of that, the interior lining of nearly every can contained bisphenol A, a chemical later linked to cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and reproductive harm. Over 100 peer-reviewed studies confirmed BPA was toxic at low doses. Campbell's did not begin transitioning to BPA-free cans until decades later. If Campbell's soup was dangerous because of what lined the can, Tang was dangerous because of what was actually in the powder. General Foods marketed it as the drink of astronauts, the same formula NASA sent to space with John Glenn. That was technically true, but the connection ended there. A single glass of Tang contained almost as much sugar as a candy bar, plus citric acid, artificial flavors, and a battery of synthetic dyes. There was no fruit in it. The vitamin C on the label was added synthetically, and everything else was chemical flavoring designed to taste like oranges without containing a single drop of juice. Poor families bought it because it was dramatically cheaper than frozen concentrate, and the astronaut marketing made it feel like a smart choice rather than a desperate one. Kids mixed it into tap water every morning and called it juice. Their parents never corrected them. Bologna was the most consumed lunch meat in low-income America, sliced thin from a loaf that Oscar Mayer had turned into a household name. The company's jingle was so effective that kids across the country could spell the brand name from memory. What those kids did not know was that Bologna was made from mechanically separated meat, a slurry of pork, chicken, or beef trimmings ground into a paste and pumped full of sodium nitrite, corn syrup, and artificial smoke flavoring. When that nitrite hit stomach acid, it could form nitrosamines. In 1970, researchers first reported that nitrite-treated meat products reacted with amines to create these carcinogenic compounds, and the finding triggered an international controversy. But the meat industry pushed back hard, and the preservative stayed on the market. A pack of Bologna cost less than $1 and could make sandwiches for a week. For poor households, the price settled the argument long before the science could. Instant mashed potatoes came in a box, required only boiling water, and tasted close enough to the real thing that exhausted parents did not care about the difference. Brands like Betty Crocker and Hungry Jack sold millions of boxes through the 1970s, and the price per serving was a fraction of what fresh potatoes cost after accounting for prep time. Buried in the ingredient list was butylated hydroxyanisole, known as BHA, an antioxidant preservative added to prevent the dehydrated flakes from going rancid. The National Toxicology Program listed BHA as reasonably anticipated to be a human carcinogen after studies showed it caused tumors in the forestomachs of rats and mice. By the mid-1970s, estimated annual use of BHA in American food had reached 450 metric tons. The preservative was also in cereals, potato chips, chewing gum, and lard. No warning label was required then, and none is required now. If your father served in Vietnam or Korea, there was a good chance he brought SOS home with him. The name stood for something unprintable, but every military family knew the dish. Chipped beef on toast was dried, salted beef shaved into thin strips, cooked into a thick white gravy made from flour and milk, and poured over slices of white bread. The dried beef was preserved with massive amounts of sodium, often exceeding a full day's recommended intake in a single serving. Sodium nitrite kept the meat shelf-stable. In working-class kitchens, it cost almost nothing to prepare, and the heavy gravy made it feel substantial. Fathers made it on nights their wives worked late, using the same recipe the mess hall had taught them. The kids hated it. The fathers ate it in silence. Nobody at the table talked about what the name actually meant. Store-brand macaroni and cheese cost about 29 cents a box, and for anyone who could not afford Kraft, it was Tuesday dinner. The neon orange powder that passed for cheese sauce contained yellow 5 and yellow 6, two synthetic dyes derived from petroleum. In 2017, a study tested 30 mac and cheese products and found phthalates, industrial plasticizers used to soften plastic, in the cheese powder of nearly every brand tested. The highest concentrations appeared in the powdered cheese packets, not in natural cheese. Phthalates are endocrine disruptors, meaning they interfere with hormone function, and have been linked to reproductive problems, behavioral issues in kids, and metabolic disorders. None of this was on the label. Each serving also delivered a heavy dose of sodium and saturated fat. But at 29 cents, it was the cheapest hot meal a parent could put on the table in under 10 minutes. The phthalates in cheap mac and cheese were invisible, but Velveeta wore its artificiality on the label. Kraft introduced it in 1928, and by the 70s, it occupied a permanent spot on the second shelf of nearly every low-income refrigerator. The 2-pound loaf came wrapped in foil inside a long rectangular box, and it melted like nothing else on earth. That perfect melt was the tell. Real cheese does not behave that way. Velveeta was classified as a pasteurized prepared cheese product because it did not contain enough actual cheese to legally be called cheese. Its ingredients included milk protein concentrate, sodium phosphate, sodium citrate, sodium alginate, and sorbic acid. A single 1-ounce serving contained nearly 400 milligrams of sodium. Mothers used it for dips, nachos, grilled sandwiches, and anything that needed to look and taste like cheese without costing what cheese cost. It filled that role perfectly, and no one ever asked what it actually was. Swanson introduced the frozen TV dinner in 1953, and by the 1970s it had become the default meal for nights when nobody had the energy to cook. The original trays were made of aluminum, and you slid the whole thing into the oven at 375 degrees. That aluminum tray, heated repeatedly, raised concerns about metal leaching into the food, particularly into acidic items like the apple cobbler compartment. Each tray packed between 800 and 1,500 milligrams of sodium, enough to approach or exceed the full daily recommendation in a single sitting. Preservatives like BHA and BHT kept the frozen meals stable for months. The meat portions were small, the vegetable compartments were mostly corn or peas cooked to mush, and the dessert was usually a square of something brown and sticky. Under $1 per tray, no dishes to wash, and the kids ate something hot without anyone having to stand at the stove. Canned tuna sat in nearly every pantry in America, and for poor families it was the most affordable fish available. Starkist and Bumblebee dominated the market, and a can cost well under $1. What nobody discussed at the kitchen table was the mercury. Tuna, especially albacore, accumulates methylmercury through the marine food chain, and in the 1970s, the FDA set an action level of 1 part per million for mercury in fish. That sounds protective until you consider that no one was tracking how much tuna a household actually consumed. A mother making tuna casserole twice a week, tuna sandwiches for school lunches, and tuna salad on weekends was feeding her kids far more mercury than any guideline anticipated. Methylmercury attacks the developing nervous system, and those consuming the most canned tuna were the ones who could least afford fresh alternatives. The warnings, when they finally arrived years later, were directed at pregnant women. Nobody thought to warn the kids who ate tuna sandwiches 5 days a week for years. Carnation evaporated milk came in a small can with a distinctive red and white label, and in the 1950s and 60s, pediatricians routinely told mothers to mix it with water and corn syrup to make infant formula at home. By the 70s, commercial formula existed but cost far more than most low-income parents could afford. So, the homemade version persisted. Evaporated milk had been heated to remove 60% of its water, concentrating the protein and minerals to levels that strained an infant's underdeveloped kidneys. The high renal solute load was especially dangerous for undernourished babies whose kidneys could not concentrate waste efficiently. The cans were lined with BPA, the same endocrine disruptor found in soup cans. No one warned parents that the formula substitute they were mixing on the kitchen counter could be damaging their baby's organs. The can cost 30 cents. Real formula cost dollars. The math made the decision. Commodity peanut butter arrived in the same government surplus boxes as the cheese and powdered milk, packed in large institutional cans with plain USDA labels. It was thick, oily, and separated in the can so that a layer of grease sat on top that had to be stirred back in. Unlike commercial brands like Jiff or Skippy, the commodity version often contained hydrogenated vegetable oil to prevent separation, adding another source of trans fats to a diet already saturated with them. The peanuts themselves carried a hidden risk. Aflatoxin, a potent carcinogen produced by mold that grows on improperly stored peanuts, was a persistent concern in bulk commodity supplies. The FDA set allowable limits at 20 parts per billion, but monitoring was inconsistent, and the cheapest peanut butter used the lowest grade peanuts. Kids spread it on white bread every day for lunch, sometimes with jelly, sometimes alone. It was protein, it was calories, and the government gave it away for free. The government handed out peanut butter and cheese, but the canned fruit cocktail in the pantry was something parents bought themselves, believing it counted as fruit. Del Monte and Libby's packed their cocktail in what the label called heavy syrup, which was another way of saying sugar water. A single serving contained more added sugar than a glazed donut. The fruit inside, mostly pale grapes, mushy pear cubes, and a few maraschino cherry halves dyed with red 40, had been cooked so thoroughly during the canning process that most of the original vitamins were gone. The can itself was lined with BPA and, before 1991, sealed with lead solder. Mothers spooned it into bowls for dessert or packed it in school lunches as the fruit serving. Kids ate it thinking they were eating something healthy. The can said fruit. Nobody flipped it over to read the sugar content on the back. Jiffy corn muffin mix cost 9 cents a box in the 1970s, and that price made it one of the most reliable staples in any low-income kitchen. A box, an egg, and a splash of milk produced a pan of cornbread in under 20 minutes. The ingredient list included partially hydrogenated soybean oil, the same source of trans fats that made margarine and Crisco dangerous. It also contained bleached wheat flour stripped of fiber and nutrients, plus sugar and chemical leavening agents. Families ate it alongside beans, soup, greens, and chili, often as the main source of carbohydrates in the meal. At 9 cents, nobody analyzed what was in it. The box was small, the instructions were simple, and the cornbread came out golden. The trans fats hiding inside would not be labeled on any food package in America for another 3 decades. Name brand soda was a luxury, but the store brand colas that lined the bottom shelf cost a fraction of what Coca-Cola or Pepsi charged. By the mid-1970s, something had changed inside those cans. The sugar industry had a new competitor. High fructose corn syrup, developed commercially in the late 60s by Japanese scientists and refined for mass production by the Clinton Corn Processing Company, began replacing cane sugar in American soft drinks around 1977. It was cheaper, sweeter, and metabolized differently in the body. Unlike glucose, fructose is processed almost entirely by the liver, and in high volumes it contributes to fatty liver disease, insulin resistance, and metabolic syndrome. Store-brand colas also contained phosphoric acid, which leaches calcium from bones, and caramel coloring produced using a process that creates 4-methylimidazole, a compound California listed as a potential carcinogen. A 2-liter bottle cost 69 cents. Kids drank it daily. Long before Crisco took over, there was lard, and in the poorest kitchens, it never actually left. Families rendered it from whatever pork fat the butcher would sell cheap, strained it through cheesecloth, and stored it in an old coffee can beside the stove. It was used for frying eggs, making biscuits, greasing cast iron pans, and deep frying everything from chicken to potatoes. A tablespoon contained nearly 6 grams of saturated fat, and about 40% of those calories came from monounsaturated oleic acid, the same fat found in olive oil. Nutritionists in the 1970s condemned it as a heart attack in a jar, urging families to switch to vegetable shortening instead. The replacement turned out to be worse. Crisco's trans fats did more cardiovascular damage than Lard's saturated fat ever could. The families who kept using lard because they could not afford Crisco may have accidentally made the safer choice. Nobody knew that at the time. Minute rice had the word instant in its appeal and nothing else going for it. The pre-cooked, dehydrated white rice was introduced by General Foods in 1949 and became a staple in low-income homes by the 70s because it cooked in 5 minutes and cost almost nothing. The process that made it instant also destroyed most of what made rice nutritious. The bran and germ were stripped during milling, removing the fiber, B vitamins, magnesium, and iron that brown rice naturally contains. What remained was essentially a starch delivery system. Mothers served it as a side dish with nearly every meal, sometimes mixed with butter or gravy, sometimes plain with salt. Kids growing up on it had no idea that the white grains on their plate had been emptied of almost every mineral their growing bodies needed. The box said enriched, meaning synthetic vitamins had been sprayed back on after processing. The fiber was gone for good. Nearly everything in a poor family's pantry in the 1970s came from a can, and every one of those cans carried a danger nobody could see. Until 1991, American food cans were assembled using lead solder to seal the side seams. Lead migrated from the solder into the food inside, and acidic products like tomatoes, fruit, and juice absorbed the highest concentrations. Children are especially vulnerable to lead because their developing brains absorb it more readily than adult tissue, and even low levels of exposure cause irreversible damage to cognitive function, behavior, and learning ability. In the early 1970s, a botulism outbreak in commercially canned mushrooms triggered America's first major food recall, pulling 75 million cans from shelves and forcing the creation of the National Botulism Surveillance System. The lead solder problem took 2 more decades to address. the FDA did not formally prohibit lead solder in food cans until 1995, and imported cans continued using it even after that. By then, an entire generation had eaten from those cans every single day. Corn pudding was one of those dishes that made the most of simple ingredients. All you needed were a few cans of creamed corn, a handful of flour, and maybe an egg or two to bind it together. The result was a buttery, soft pudding that tasted like home. As it baked, the top turned golden and crisp, while the inside stayed rich and warm. The scent of corn and butter filled the air, making even the simplest dinner feel like a celebration. When it came out of the oven, it was set proudly in the center of the table, steam rising like a sign of success. It was cheap, hearty, and perfect for stretching a meal when guests showed up unannounced. In the 1970s, many households served it alongside turkey loaf or meatloaf, calling it their holiday comfort. It filled the plate and the stomach with sweetness that made even children eat their vegetables. Some families passed it off as Southern-style cooking, even if the recipe came from the back of a can. Its golden crust and soft interior gave it the look of something much fancier than it was. For those who grew up with it, the memory still brings warmth, a simple, glowing reminder of thrift wrapped in gratitude. Jimmy Dean canned bacon burgers took America's obsession with fast food and combined it with the worst parts of canned meat. The pitch sounded appealing. Burgers ready anytime, anywhere. The reality was a soggy puck of ground beef swimming in fat, sealed up like a crime scene. Opening the can released a smell so foul it could clear an entire kitchen in seconds. The bacon bits, if you could call them that, looked like something scraped off a griddle in defeat. Frying them only made things worse. The grease multiplied like a monster from a horror movie. It was food that hissed back at you when cooked. Each can contained a smell that could strip wallpaper. The bacon was barely identifiable, more mush than meat, more memory than flavor. Yet somehow Jimmy Dean insisted this was a revolution in convenience. People popped open cans expecting a cookout, but what they got was a smell that lingered for days. The 1970s were all about pushing limits, but this went too far. A burger so processed it was practically a science experiment. Opening one felt like betrayal. Eating one felt like punishment. It didn't take long for consumers to realize that no meal worth eating should clang when it hit the plate. Instant mashed potatoes were the unsung hero of the 1970s working-class dinner table. Just add water, stir, and you had a bowl of creamy white comfort. No peeling, no mashing, no waste, just convenience you could rely on when time, money, and energy ran thin. They were not perfect, but they filled the plate beside ham or Spam and soaked up every bit of instant gravy like they were made for each other. When poured from the box, the flakes looked like nothing. But the moment hot water hit, they bloomed into something that felt like plenty. Mothers stirred slowly, fluffing them with care, turning thrift into comfort with every spoonful. The smell of salt and butter filled the house, blending with laughter and the sound of clinking plates. Instant potatoes were proof that love didn't need to come from scratch, it only needed to be warm. The flakes came in simple boxes, but the satisfaction they brought was real. Children loved them for their smoothness. Parents loved them for their speed. When Christmas dinner needed stretching, instant potatoes were the answer. It was the kind of meal that said, "We may do, but we still celebrated." For families counting every penny, those pale, powdery spuds were a small piece of holiday peace. Mashed potatoes were the kind of miracle that made holidays possible for struggling families. Real potatoes were cheap, yes, but peeling, boiling, and mashing took time and energy that many did not have. Boxed flakes promised the same result with half the work and cost. The box sat proudly on the counter, a promise of ease and warmth in the middle of a hectic holiday week. The sound of the flakes hitting the pot was unmistakable, soft, papery, and full of potential. And when stirred into hot water, it transformed into creamy comfort in seconds. Even without butter or cream, it tasted like effort and care, which was enough to make it special. When whipped with a little butter or powdered milk, they fluffed up into smooth, creamy clouds that looked just like the real thing. They soaked up gravy beautifully and filled stomachs fast, which was all most families cared about. The taste was mild and familiar, even comforting. Some people even added garlic powder or cream of mushroom soup to give it more depth. For kids, it was one of the few dishes that felt indulgent, a warm pile of softness on an otherwise simple plate. No one talked about what was missing. They were too busy enjoying what they had. Instant mashed potatoes reminded everyone that convenience was not laziness. It was survival with a smile. Tuna noodle loaf mix was the Frankenstein's monster of mid-century meal kits. Inside the box was powdered sauce, dried noodles, and a mysterious gelatin binder that turned dinner into a wiggling block of horror. Add canned tuna and water, and voila, a loaf that looked alive and smelled dead. It wobbled on the plate like it was trying to escape, oozing grayish liquid from its sides. Kids stared at it in fear. Parents pretended it was innovative, and even cats circled it suspiciously. Some households gave up halfway and called it soup instead. It still wasn't edible. The gelatin made it both dry and wet at the same time, a texture only nightmares could describe. It jiggled when it shouldn't have, squeaked when sliced, and somehow managed to taste both fishy and flavorless. Families across America tried to eat it politely, but even the dog walked away. The company behind it called it a wholesome family dinner. History called it culinary trauma. The 1970s produced many bad ideas, but this one defied physics, taste, and mercy. Tuna noodle loaf mix was proof that some foods should remain mysteries. Instant gravy mix was the quiet miracle worker that pulled every cheap Christmas dinner together. Whether it came from a packet or a jar, it could make instant potatoes taste rich and canned meat feel freshly roasted. Housewives whisked it in boiling water, watching it thicken into glossy brown perfection in minutes. It was the smell of holidays, even when there was no turkey in the oven. The first whiff rising from the saucepan made every mouth water. It didn't matter that it came from powder. It had the soul of a real meal. The deep, salty flavor filled the gaps left by missing roasts and homemade drippings. Instant gravy made every plate look like a triumph, even if it was just survival dressed in flavor. The savory aroma covered every shortage, every substitute, every reminder of what the meal might have been. It was the kind of kitchen magic that gave dignity to dinner plates that might have looked plain without it. Instant gravy made the meal whole, binding every side, every scrap, into something you could be proud to serve. Marshmallow-topped sweet potatoes brought color and sweetness to the table, even when the pantry was nearly bare. Most families used canned yams, drained and mixed with margarine and brown sugar before layering marshmallows on top. When baked, it came out bubbling and golden, a dessert disguised as a side dish. As it cooked, the marshmallows slowly melted into a caramelized crust, filling the house with the smell of sugar and cinnamon. Parents would pull it from the oven like it was a prize, the gooey topping stretching with every spoonful. Kids could barely wait to dig in, even if it meant burning their tongues on that first molten bite. Kids loved it, adults tolerated it, and everyone recognized it as a holiday classic. It was cheap to make, cheerful to look at, and filling enough to stretch a small meal into something grand. Many mothers called it their special dish, the one that made dinner feel fancy. The smell of caramelized sugar and cinnamon made even the humblest kitchen feel festive. Sure, it was sticky and far too sweet, but that was part of its charm. Marshmallow-topped sweet potatoes became a symbol of optimism, a reminder that a touch of sweetness could make any hard year easier to swallow. Canned Jell-O savory flavors were the culinary equivalent of a dare. Celery, tomato, and mixed vegetable, words that should never be followed by gelatin dessert. In the 1970s, homemakers were told to mold everything, so Jell-O thought, why not salad? The result was wobbly towers of confusion served proudly at luncheons. Each bite felt like betrayal. Cold, rubbery vegetables suspended in sweet goo. The tomato flavor tasted like spaghetti sauce that lost its will to live, while the celery one just crunched wrong. People tried to convince themselves it was classy, cutting into it with forced smiles as children watched in horror. Even the family cat refused samples. The flavor was as bad as it sounds. Imagine slurping a cold tomato soup that fights back. Even worse, these mixes were often paired with tuna, olives, or boiled eggs suspended like fossils in lime slime. Magazine ads called them innovative. Dinner guests called them a cry for help. Every bite was a journey through texture and poor judgment. Jell-O proved that not all foods should jiggle, and certainly not ones that tasted like vegetables and regret. Canned green beans were a fixture on every poor family's Christmas table. Soft, salty, and somehow satisfying. They lacked the crispness of fresh vegetables, but they were dependable and cheap, which mattered far more. Most homes turned them into the classic green bean casserole, mixing them with canned soup and fried onions. It was a dish that looked fancy enough for company but cost next to nothing. The pop of the can was like a starting bell for holiday cooking, signaling another meal pulled together with love. Housewives stirred the beans carefully into cream of mushroom soup, making magic out of pantry staples. The smell that drifted from the oven was rich and savory, disguising the fact that every ingredient came from a tin. No one cared. It was comfort on a budget, and every bite tasted like home. The smell of it baking filled small kitchens with a holiday coziness that belied its humble ingredients. Even those who grew tired of eating canned food the rest of the year found comfort in that familiar taste. They were a symbol of making do, of turning the simplest groceries into something worth celebrating. And for one night a year, that was enough. Boxed stuffing mix was one of the greatest holiday inventions for the working-class kitchen. Before it, stuffing required hours of baking bread, chopping vegetables, and using precious butter. But in the 1970s, a cardboard box with dried cubes and powdered seasoning could deliver that same aroma in minutes. The smell alone could make any small apartment kitchen feel like a feast, even if there was little else cooking. Children would peek over the stove, watching the steam rise as the water mixed with the herbs and breadcrumbs, filling the air with warmth and memory. It was the kind of scent that lingered long after dinner ended, like comfort baked into the walls. All it took was water, maybe a dab of margarine if you had it, and the magic was done. It smelled like sage, onion, and nostalgia. Families poured it into casseroles or used it to fill out plates next to turkey loaf or Spam. Some added a few diced apples or celery to make it special, while others stretched it with extra bread to feed more mouths. The best part was how it brought everyone together, because even though it was cheap, it tasted rich. Boxed stuffing became a symbol of the era's ingenuity. Simple ingredients, little effort, and maximum comfort. Every spoonful carried the flavor of holidays made from determination and love, proving that even a box could hold a bit of Christmas spirit. Dieter's Shimmer gelatin drink was a miracle of marketing and a nightmare of taste. It promised to replace entire meals with a sparkling, jiggling liquid delight, words that should never describe food. The bottle shimmered like glitter in suspension, as if you were about to drink a lava lamp. It was made from sweetened gelatin water, blended with artificial fruit flavors so intense they made your tongue tingle. When you shook the bottle, it sparkled under the light, mesmerizing, until you remembered you had to drink it. The consistency clung to your throat like slime, sliding down slowly as if reconsidering the journey. Early testers described it as sparkly regret in a bottle. Yet somehow it was marketed as glamorous, the disco drink for dieters. The texture was somewhere between cough syrup and melted Jell-O, and the aftertaste stayed for hours. Dieters hoped it would help them feel glamorous while losing weight, but it mostly made them question their life choices. The company boasted that it was the future of nutrition, which might have been true in a dystopian sense. Even the label couldn't decide whether to promise health or fashion, as if a disco ball and a diet book had a baby. Shimmer proved that the 1970s could sell anything, as long as it sparkled. Canned sweet potatoes were the base of countless 1970s Christmas casseroles, soft and syrupy right out of the tin. Housewives drained the thick liquid, mashed them with a little margarine and sugar, then topped them with marshmallows or pecans if the budget allowed. The result was sweet, heavy, and comforting, the taste of home when the cupboards were half empty. It was one of those foods that reminded people that holidays were not about luxury, but about making do with what you had. The orange mash looked bright and joyful on the plate, a flash of color in otherwise simple meals. It was spooned out with pride, even when everyone knew it came from a can. The sugary glaze thickened as it cooled, turning leftovers into dessert by morning. For a few days each year, that casserole dish was the heart of the table, a symbol of sweetness in lean times. Even from a can, sweet potatoes carried warmth and heart. The orange glow in the casserole dish was as much a decoration as it was a meal. Families did not need a fancy roast to feel festive, they just needed this. Tuna casserole was the quiet hero of holiday dinners for families who had to make every dollar count. It was cheap, filling, and surprisingly comforting, a creamy combination of pantry staples that made even tough times feel a little softer. A can of tuna, a can of cream of mushroom soup, some egg noodles, and a sprinkle of breadcrumbs were all you needed to turn an empty table into a small feast. The smell of it baking, warm, savory, and slightly salty, was enough to make any kitchen feel like home. For many, it stood in for the ham or turkey they could not afford, and no one complained. The crunchy topping, made from whatever was on hand, saltines, cornflakes, or stale bread, added the perfect contrast to the creamy base. Kids picked out the peas, parents ignored the complaints, and everyone ate until the pan was scraped clean. Tuna casserole was not glamorous, but it was dependable. It showed up year after year, proof that resourcefulness could taste like comfort. And when leftovers were served the next day, reheated in a well-worn dish, it tasted even better, like pride disguised as dinner. Snack pack meat. Pudding might be the most cursed phrase ever printed on a label. In an age obsessed with efficiency, someone decided dessert cups should also double as dinner. The result was a smooth, meat-flavored paste in those same foil-topped tins that once held chocolate and vanilla pudding. The moment the lid peeled back, an unholy smell escaped, beefy, metallic, and faintly sweet. The texture was worse, a thick gray sludge that clung to the spoon like an insult. Even desperate dieters couldn't stomach more than a bite before surrendering. The marketing photos tried to make it look elegant, but nothing could make beef pudding glamorous. Flavors like beef gravy delight and chicken spread haunted grocery aisles for a short but horrifying season. People didn't know whether to eat it warm, cold, or throw it out immediately. The idea was protein on the go, but the experience was regret in every spoonful. Texture-wise, it sat somewhere between cat food and wet cement. It was marketed toward busy homemakers and bachelors, which should have been a warning in itself. By the time the first batch expired, even dogs were saying no. Snack pack meat pudding was an invention that asked, "What if dinner didn't have to be chewed?" and answered, "Because it absolutely should." Canned cranberry sauce was the holiday miracle that slid straight out of the tin, perfectly shaped with ridges like a timeline of Christmases past. Housewives loved it because it required no mixing, no measuring, and certainly no fresh cranberries, which were too pricey for most families anyway. You just opened the can, gave it a little shake, and there it was, ready to serve, wobbling on the plate like ruby-colored jelly. A spoonful beside canned ham or turkey made the meal feel complete. The first slice was always a ceremony, the satisfying slurp as it dropped onto the dish, followed by laughter around the table. The flavor was sharp, sugary, and oddly elegant for something so simple. It was that flash of red that made every plate feel festive, like a burst of joy amid all the beige. Even when times were hard, that glossy sheen reminded everyone that a bit of sparkle still belonged at their table. It was sweet, tart, and undeniably artificial, but it brought a burst of color to gray winter plates. Some families even sliced it neatly into rings, pretending it was homemade. For many, that tin of cranberry sauce was Christmas itself, a small luxury you could buy for under $1. It was proof that even factory-made food could carry a little magic when shared around the table. Turkey loaf was the next best thing to having the real bird in the oven. Sold frozen or packed in a can, it promised the flavor of a Thanksgiving feast without the steep price tag. The meat was processed, seasoned, and ready to heat. No basting, no waiting, and no wasted scraps. For many working families, that convenience meant everything. It fed several people, paired perfectly with boxed stuffing, and looked right at home next to the cranberry sauce, even if it wobbled a little too much on the plate. Some people even went the extra mile, brushing it with melted butter or topping it with breadcrumbs to make it look more homemade. Kids grew up thinking that this was normal, the kind of turkey you could afford, the kind that fit in the family budget. The smell was still comforting, and the taste, though a little salty, felt like the holidays. Even when money was short, the turkey loaf reminded everyone that celebration was not about perfection. It was about togetherness. And when you sliced into it under dim kitchen lights, it felt close enough to the real thing. Salad in a can was the era's saddest attempt at health food. Lettuce, dressing, and despair sealed tight in tin. Each can promised a fresh, balanced meal that could be stored for months, which should have been the first red flag. Once opened, you were greeted by limp, brownish leaves drowning in vinegar-scented goo. The smell hit first, a sharp metallic tang that made you question your life choices. The dressing had congealed into something resembling glue, and the lettuce was so wilted it practically begged to be buried. Advertisers posed models on picnic blankets holding open cans, pretending to enjoy it. The only thing fresher than the salad was the regret that followed. The tagline was "Salad for busy people," which really meant people who have given up. The taste was like sour dishwater with a hint of aluminum, and yet it was marketed with bright smiles and picnic scenes. It was meant to bring freshness to the shelf-stable revolution, but instead, it buried salad's reputation for an entire generation. Even cats turned their noses up at it. People quickly realized that lettuce, nature's most fragile food, did not belong anywhere near a can opener. In the age of innovation, this one proved that not everything needed to be preserved. Stovetop stuffing was the decade's great kitchen shortcut. 10 minutes from packet to pan, and suddenly the room smelled like Christmas. The mixture of breadcrumbs and herbs came ready to mix, no stale bread required. Housewives poured boiling water over it, fluffed it with a fork, and pretended it had roasted in the oven all morning. The truth did not matter. The illusion was everything. As soon as the sage and onion scent hit the air, it wrapped the room in warmth. Families gathered near the stove, lured by that rich, savory smell that promised comfort. It was a kind of culinary magic. Ordinary water transformed into holiday spirit. Each bite carried the illusion of abundance, and that illusion was enough to make people smile. It brought that unmistakable aroma of sage, onion, and nostalgia that made families feel rich for an evening. When you served it beside canned meat and instant potatoes, it transformed the ordinary into something close to a feast. People might have laughed at how fake it was, but they still went back for seconds. It tasted like warmth, like memory, like home. Proof that comfort could come from a box. Biscuits were one of the easiest ways to make a holiday meal feel like a feast. That yellow box was a miracle worker for families on tight budgets. With just water or milk, anyone could bake fluffy, buttery biscuits that tasted homemade. The dough came together in minutes, thick and sticky under calloused hands that had made it 100 times before. The smell of them baking filled even the smallest kitchens with warmth, masking the chill that came from drafty walls or tight finances. When the tray came out of the oven, those golden biscuits looked like celebration itself. Simple, hot, and perfect. Fresh bread was expensive, but biscuit gave people a way to fill baskets with warm, golden rolls for pennies. The smell alone made any kitchen feel like Christmas. Many kids grew up remembering those biscuits more fondly than the meal itself, soft, flaky, and dripping with margarine or syrup. For mothers, it was a point of pride that something so cheap could feel so comforting. Some even used the mix to make dumplings or shortcakes when dessert ingredients ran low. It was the kind of invention that kept people fed and spirits high. The 1970s were about making do, and biscuit turned that into an art form. Libby's canned macaroni and cheese was everything wrong with the 1970s obsession with shelf-stable food. Open the can, and out slid a gelatinous orange blob that looked more like melted crayons than comfort food. It wobbled. It sloshed. It dared you to call it dinner. Steam rose from it like something being freed from a tomb. The cheese sauce was thick enough to patch drywall, and the noodles disintegrated on contact. Even the label warned to heat thoroughly, as if Libby's knew it was dangerous to eat cold. The only thing cheesier than the product was the marketing that called it homestyle. The noodles were limp, the sauce was sour, and the smell could ruin your appetite for a week. Yet somehow, Libby's ads promised creamy perfection, a phrase now used only in irony. It was a meal made for fallout shelters, not families. Parents bought it once, kids refused to eat it twice, and soon it vanished into canned food infamy. Today, it serves as a cautionary tale. Just because you can it, doesn't mean you should. Spam was the uninvited guest that always found a way to stay for dinner, and at Christmas, it wore its Sunday best. Families fried it, baked it, diced it, or dressed it with cloves and brown sugar like it was a proper roast. You could slice it into sandwiches or stretch it into casseroles, and no one complained because it filled you up. Its pink, rubbery charm became an odd symbol of comfort and survival. It sizzled loud in the pan, the smell of salt and fat turning hunger into hope. Housewives sliced it in neat squares, brushed it with glaze, and served it proudly, because feeding your family was what mattered most. The texture might have been strange, but the pride in serving it was real. Spam wasn't just food. It was a symbol of resourcefulness and love in hard times. For those living paycheck to paycheck, Spam was not an embarrassment. It was reliability in a tin. Every kitchen cupboard had at least one can tucked away just in case. It was salty, hearty, and familiar, the kind of taste that did not pretend to be anything else. In a way, it reminded people that Christmas was not about extravagance. It was about making something humble feel like home. Budget meatloaf with saltine crackers was the king of resourceful holiday cooking. Ground beef was a splurge, so stretching it with crushed crackers and ketchup made it last longer. Every bite tasted like hard work and home. Mothers shaped it with care, glazing it with whatever they could find: tomato paste, brown sugar, or even jelly. The smell filled the house, mixing with the sound of laughter and old Christmas music on the radio. It might not have been turkey or ham, but it was rich in something else: comfort. Kids fought for the crispy ends, and fathers proudly carved it like it was prime rib. The leftovers made sandwiches that lasted through the week. It was proof that a little creativity could make a humble meal feel grand. In the 1970s, that was the real secret of surviving the holidays, turning whatever you had into something worth remembering. Space food sticks were supposed to make you feel like an astronaut, but most people felt more like hostages to bad taste. Marketed as the food of the future, these chewy, tube-shaped snacks promised energy, convenience, and space-age nutrition. In reality, they were rubbery chocolate glue wrapped in foil, sticking to your teeth and your soul in equal measure. The packaging screamed adventure, but the flavor whispered punishment. They were dense enough to survive re-entry, yet fragile enough to crumble into brown dust if left in the sun. Parents kept buying them because kids loved the NASA tie-in, not because anyone actually wanted to eat them. It was the only snack that could make both astronauts and children question their life choices. They came in flavors like caramel, peanut butter, and chocolate, though none resembled anything found on Earth. Kids begged their parents for them, imagining themselves floating in zero gravity, only to realize astronauts probably ate better than this. The ads showed smiling families pretending this was adventure food, but in every kitchen, the reaction was the same: confusion, then regret. The texture was somewhere between an eraser and a protein bar that lost its will to live. They disappeared by the 1980s, only to return decades later as a nostalgia novelty. Because apparently, even bad memories can make money if you wrap them in silver. Boxed macaroni and cheese was the comfort blanket of the 1970s kitchen, especially at Christmas when fresh cheese was out of reach. That bright orange powder was a small miracle in itself, cheap, easy, and instantly satisfying. Parents loved it because it fed a crowd. Kids loved it because it tasted like happiness. Sometimes housewives would mix in canned peas or a few slices of leftover hot dogs to make it stretch even further. It was never fancy, but the smell alone could make a small apartment feel rich. The bright color and creamy texture made children feel like they were eating something special, even when it came from a box. For many families, that little saucepan on the stove meant one night of peace, one meal without worry. On holidays, it often stood in for more expensive sides, and no one ever complained. Housewives added milk or butter when they could, stretching it with love and improvisation. It was soft, creamy, and perfectly filling, the kind of food that made you forget what you did not have. It was proof that joy did not have to be expensive. Sometimes it came in a blue box with a promise of comfort. They fed us what they could afford, and none of them knew what was inside. Like and subscribe if you remember.